Have you ever been judged based on how you look? Maybe someone assumed you weren't important just because of your clothes, your job, or even your skin color. Well, today's story is about a man who faced exactly that, except he wasn't just anyone. He was one of the most famous actors in the world. Imagine stepping into a car, expecting a simple ride, only to be met with hostility and judgment. That's what happened when Keanu Reeves got into an Uber, just looking for a quiet ride home. But instead of a normal trip, the driver made a mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. By the end of this story, you'll see why judging people too quickly can cost you everything. Stay with me, because this one's unforgettable. Los Angeles. A city where luxury cars and celebrities are just another part of the scenery. But on this particular night, under the dim glow of streetlights, a simple Uber ride was about to turn into something no one could have expected. Keanu Reeves had just wrapped up a long day. Dressed in his usual low-key style, worn-out jeans, a black hoodie, and an old baseball cap, he blended in with the crowd. No entourage, no flashing cameras, just a man trying to get home. He pulled out his phone, booked an Uber, and waited on the sidewalk. A few minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up. The driver, a man in his early 40s named Carl, glanced at the screen, then at the man standing outside his car. Great, another broke guy looking for a cheap ride. Carl had been driving Uber for years, but he had a habit of judging his passengers at first glance. Expensive suits meant good tips. Hoodies and worn-out sneakers? Probably not worth the gas. And to him, this guy looked like nothing special, probably another struggling artist or, worse, someone who'd argue over the fare. Keanu opened the door and slid into the back seat. "Hey, man. How's your night going?" Carl barely acknowledged him, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "Yeah, busy night." But his tone carried something else, disdain. He sighed, shook his head slightly, and tapped on the screen to start the ride. As they drove through the city, Carl kept glancing at his passenger. Something about the guy annoyed him. Maybe it was how quiet he was. Or maybe it was the way he sat, completely at ease, like he had nothing to prove. Carl scoffed. Probably doesn't even have a real job. The car slowed at a red light, and that's when Carl decided to break the silence. "So, what do you do for a living?" Keanu, still relaxed, offered a small smile. "I work in film." Carl rolled his eyes. He'd heard this 100 times. Every other person in LA worked in film, which usually meant they were unemployed, waiting for a miracle. "Oh, let me guess. You're an aspiring actor? Doing auditions, waiting for your big break?" Keanu shrugged. "Something like that." Carl smirked, shaking his head. "Man, I gotta be honest. You guys gotta be realistic. I mean, look at you. You're what, mid-50s? Hollywood doesn't take in guys like you unless you're already famous." Keanu said nothing. He just looked out the window, watching the city lights blur past. But Carl wasn't done. "I swear, every time I pick up someone dressed like this, they got the same story. I work in film." "Yeah, sure. You probably do part-time gigs, huh? Background extra? Maybe a waiter at some celebrity event? No offense, man, but you don't look like someone who's made it." Keanu still didn't respond. He just let the words hang in the air, his expression unreadable. But Carl took the silence as an invitation to keep talking. "You know, I had this one guy last week, same thing. Told me he was in the industry. Turns out, he was delivering food to an actual actor's house. Man, I tell you, people need to stop fooling themselves." Keanu let out a quiet breath, still calm. "Maybe people just like doing what they love." Carl scoffed. "Yeah, well, liking something doesn't pay the bills. You'll see." You'll wake up one day and realize this whole acting dream was just a waste of time. Another silence followed. Carl was so caught up in his rant that he didn't even notice something strange. The streets they were passing through, the billboards overhead, the posters on the sides of buildings. One massive banner stretched across a high-rise. A new action film. The lead actor, dressed in full costume, holding a gun, his face bold and unmistakable. Keanu Reeves. And yet, Carl, so focused on belittling his passenger, had no idea who was sitting right behind him. But he was about to find out. The ride continued, but the air inside the car was getting heavier. Carl, completely unaware of who his passenger really was, kept talking, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Man, you know what? I actually respect people who grind, but there's a difference between working hard and just being delusional." Keanu, still calm, turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Delusional?" Carl chuckled, as if he had just heard the most ridiculous thing. "Yeah, man. Look, I don't mean to be rude, but I've been around. I see guys like you all the time. Living paycheck to paycheck, chasing some dream that's never gonna happen. At some point, you gotta accept reality. Maybe get a real job, you know?" Keanu simply nodded, as if he was considering Carl's words. But Carl wasn't finished. "You ever think about that? Like, if the whole acting thing doesn't work out, what's your backup plan? You got savings? A degree? Or you just hoping someone's gonna magically give you a big break?" Keanu let out a soft breath. "I don't think I've ever needed a backup plan." Carl scoffed, gripping the wheel tighter. "Man, you sound like one of those motivational speakers. No backup plan, just believe in yourself." "Yeah, tell that to my cousin. Spent 15 years trying to make it in Hollywood. Ended up broke, divorced, and driving for Uber, just like me." There was something bitter in Carl's tone now. Something personal. Keanu remained silent, watching Carl carefully. He could see it now. This wasn't just about him. This was about Carl's own life. His own failures. "You know what really annoys me? The rich guys. The ones who got handed everything. Connections, family money, big-time agents. Meanwhile, guys like me, working 14-hour shifts, busting our backs, what do we get? Nothing." Keanu could hear it clearly now. Carl wasn't just talking about struggling actors anymore. He was talking about himself. "You think all successful people were handed everything?" Carl scoffed again. "Oh, come on, man. Don't be naive. Look at Hollywood. You really think some regular guy, dressed like you, sitting in the back of my car, actually has a shot? No way. You need money. You need the right last name." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice still calm but firmer now. "So, what about the ones who didn't have any of that? The ones who started with nothing?" Carl huffed, clearly irritated. "Yeah, sure. Maybe 1 in a million. But you know what? Most of those guys? They don't dress like you. They walk around in designer suits, drive fancy cars. They don't ride Uber." Keanu smiled, just slightly. "Maybe they do. Maybe some of them still like keeping things simple." Carl laughed loudly, shaking his head. "Yeah, right. Name one." Keanu didn't answer. He just sat back, letting Carl dig his own hole deeper. As they reached an intersection, Carl suddenly slowed the car. Outside, a massive electronic billboard lit up the night sky. An upcoming movie poster. The title in bold letters. And right there, in the center of the image, Keanu Reeves. The same man sitting quietly in the back seat of Carl's car. But Carl was too busy ranting to notice. "Look, I'm just saying, guys like you. They waste years chasing something that'll never happen. And the real successful ones? Man, you wouldn't even recognize them. Keanu's eyes flicked toward the billboard. Then, ever so slightly, he smirked. Maybe you would. Carl frowned. What? Keanu simply nodded toward the window. Carl followed his gaze, and his face changed instantly. His eyes went wide. His mouth slightly open. The confident, smug expression drained in an instant. And for the first time in the entire ride, Carl fell silent. Silence filled the car. Carl's fingers clenched the steering wheel as his eyes remained locked on the billboard. His mouth twitched slightly, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. The man on the screen. The face staring back at him. It was identical to the one sitting right behind him. His throat went dry. He blinked rapidly, hoping, praying, that it was some kind of mistake. But it wasn't. The name on the billboard spelled it out clearly. Keanu Reeves. His stomach twisted into knots. The man he had been mocking for the last 20 minutes, was one of the most respected and beloved actors in the world. A global icon. A multimillionaire. Heat rushed to his face as panic started to creep in. His heart pounded in his chest, every condescending word he had spoken replaying in his mind. This couldn't be happening. He swallowed hard and darted his eyes toward the rearview mirror, his expression shifting from arrogance to sheer disbelief. Keanu was looking right at him. Calm. Unbothered. A quiet knowing smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Carl's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He wanted to say something, anything, to fix this. But what could he possibly say now? The realization hit him like a freight train. He had just insulted a man who could buy and sell everything Carl had ever worked for without a second thought. Shame burned through him. The confident, dismissive attitude he had carried throughout the ride had vanished. He suddenly felt exposed, like a fool who had spent the last 20 minutes digging his own grave, one insult at a time. His mind raced for damage control. Maybe Keanu hadn't taken it seriously. Maybe he could laugh it off. A nervous chuckle escaped his lips, but it fell flat in the tense air. Hey, man, you should have told me, he muttered, forcing a weak grin. Keanu simply raised an eyebrow, as if asking, why? Carl let out another awkward laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. I mean, wow. You're Keanu Reeves. That's crazy, right? No wonder you're so chill. The word sounded hollow, even to him. He was grasping at straws now. Keanu didn't respond. He didn't need to. The weight of Carl's mistake was already crushing him. Carl's hands gripped the wheel tighter as his pulse pounded in his ears. His thoughts spiraled. Had Keanu recorded the conversation? Was he about to be blasted all over social media? Was this going to cost him his job? A single thought pushed its way to the front of his mind, cold and terrifying. What if Keanu reported him? What if this ride ended with more than just embarrassment? He had no idea what was coming next. And that scared him more than anything. Carl's throat felt tight as he struggled to find the right words. His mind raced, scrambling for a way out of the mess he had created. He had spent the entire ride looking down on a man who could ruin his career with a single phone call. His fingers trembled slightly on the wheel. He forced a laugh, awkward, forced, and empty. Hey, man, look, I was just messing around, you know? Just talking. Didn't mean anything by it. Keanu didn't reply. He simply held Carl's gaze in the mirror, calm and unreadable. Carl's heart pounded harder. He needed to fix this. Listen, I respect you, man. I really do. I didn't realize who you were. If I had known. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression shifting ever so slightly. Carl shut his mouth. That was the problem, wasn't it? If he had known. Would he have acted differently? Would he have treated Keanu with the same arrogance and mockery if he had realized the man in his back seat was one of the most famous actors in the world? Carl exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of his own hypocrisy pressing down on him. He glanced back at Keanu, expecting anger. Maybe even the silent, calculated look of a man who was planning his next move. Instead, Keanu's expression softened, just slightly. Carl swallowed hard. "I was wrong," he muttered, barely recognizing his own voice. "I shouldn't have judged you like that. I shouldn't judge anyone like that." The words hung in the air. For the first time in a long time, Carl felt small. Not because Keanu was rich. Not because he was famous. But because he had seen himself clearly. And he didn't like what he saw. The silence stretched on. He braced himself for whatever was coming next. Then, Keanu did something Carl never expected. He smiled. Just a small, knowing smile. "No worries, man," Keanu said, his voice light, almost casual. "Happens all the time." Carl blinked. That was it? No anger? No consequences? No threats about getting him fired or exposing him online? Just forgiveness? Carl didn't know what to say. As they pulled up to the destination, he hesitated, gripping the wheel tighter. "Hey, thanks, man." Keanu nodded, pushing open the door. He paused before stepping out, glancing back one last time. "Just try to be kinder next time," he said, his voice sincere but firm. "You never know who you're talking to." And with that, he was gone. Carl sat there, staring at the empty back seat, his heart still pounding. He had walked into this ride with a sense of superiority. Now, he just felt humbled. Emotional connection, deepening the character moments, 300 to 400 words. Carl sat in his car, staring out at the city lights. His hands rested on the wheel, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. The weight of Keanu's last words settled deep in his chest. Try to be kinder next time. You never know who you're talking to. He replayed the conversation in his head, the arrogance in his voice, the judgment in his tone. He had been so quick to assume, so eager to belittle. And for what? His stomach churned. It wasn't just about Keanu Reeves. It was about how many times he had done this before. How many passengers had he dismissed, mocked, or looked down upon just because they didn't fit his idea of success? His fingers tapped restlessly against the steering wheel. He thought about his cousin, the one who had struggled in Hollywood, the one he used as an example of failure. Had he ever truly supported him? Or had he just treated him like another cautionary tale? A ping from his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. Another ride request. His instinct was to accept it without thinking, to push forward as if nothing had happened. But something inside him hesitated. He looked at the name on the request. A random passenger, just like before. Just another person needing a ride. But this time, Carl saw it differently. This wasn't just a customer. This was a person. Someone with a story. Someone with dreams, struggles, and a life beyond the few minutes they spent in his car. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like just another Uber driver. He felt like a man who had just learned a lesson he should have known all along. Carl took a deep breath and hit accept. This time, he would listen. This time, he would be better. Carl drove through the city, but everything felt different now. The buildings looked the same, the streets hadn't changed, but something inside him had shifted. For years, he had measured people by what they wore, how they spoke, and whether they looked successful in his eyes. He had built his own version of the world, one where people were either important or invisible. And tonight, that world had crumbled. Keanu Reeves, a man worth millions, a global icon, had sat in his car, quietly listening, never once acting superior. He could have humiliated Carl, called him out, or even cost him his job. But he didn't. Instead, he chose humility. He chose kindness. Carl exhaled slowly, gripping the wheel as the weight of that realization settled deeper. All his life, he had told himself that success was about power. About looking the part. About proving something to the world. But Keanu had shown him something different. Real power wasn't in how much money you had. It wasn't in fancy suits, expensive cars, or the ability to put someone in their place. Real power was in character. In how you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you. In the moments when no one is watching. Carl pulled up to another red light and caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, he didn't see someone who had been dealt a bad hand in life. He saw someone who still had a chance to change. A chance to be better. As the light turned green, he whispered under his breath, almost as if making a promise to himself. You never know who you're talking to. And this time, he meant it.